Next session we are going to have, we will be turning to a topic that's becoming increasingly important in today's global and diverse workplaces. It's entitled Bridging the Gaps, Mental Wellbeing Across Cultures and Generations. And I think you have heard from my various colleagues earlier about how Intellect really want to be that agent that bridges, the different cultures and providing parity of care across different cultures. We often hear that knowing your customers is key to good business, but the same applies to employees as well. Understanding their unique cultural and generational context is essential for creating meaningful well-being strategies that truly meet people where they are at. So we will be having a conversation, and I'm excited to announce the panel. We will hear from HR leaders who are putting this into practice. And to guide this conversation, we also have Frank, SVP of Growth at Intellect, who will be moderating the conversation. So joining him on the panel, we have Sam Neo, Group HR Director at APAC Hotel Group, Nicole Golloso, Director of HR and Corporate Communications Singapore and Hong Kong, and Regional DEI Lead for APAC at McCann Worldgroup, as well as Hiroshi Limell, Senior Assistant Director at A-Star. So please join me in welcoming our panelists as well as Frank.
Hello and morning, everyone. It's nice to be in a new venue this year, and I'm also really glad to bring together a panel that coincidentally all acquainted prior to this session, not even arranged. So glad to have that. So I would like to definitely get the panelists to introduce themselves in a bit, but to set the stage, this session is kind of like what I like to think of. I mean, as a name specifically, but I think of it really as just the real talk session of the event, right? So it's less of talking about why mental health is important, should we do this, should we do that, but more, what are the challenges that we see, and how do we sort of actively in our daily habits and lives or professional selves overcome these challenges, and really getting real into like what are the daily concerns, dynamics that we would see from different groups of employees, and of course the sort of employers that we're responsible for as well. So maybe just a quick anecdote before I start. I remember when we were preparing for the panel, the question floated up, like, oh, hey Frank, what if one of my perspectives may differ from how Intellect runs our service? And actually, that's something that we very much encourage and welcome. So I think our idea is, for this session to challenge us, for panelists to bring their lived experience, right, and also share any uncomfortable truths. So the sort of topic I like to think about is, apps don't change organizational culture, people do. Right, but supported by apps, hopefully. Right, so that's, I think, the context which I want to start. And without further ado, I would like the panelists to introduce yourselves. Maybe Sam first and then Hiroshi last, if that's okay. Maybe you can share with us, what you do and a fun fact about yourself.
Sure. I'd like to introduce myself as a corpreneur. That's an interesting fact. I have a day job as the head of HR for Park Hotel Group, while concurrently still on my entrepreneurship journey itself. Been an entrepreneur for past 8+ years actually. Started my career as a HR professional, left corporate at 30, or I call myself retired from corporate at 30. Started my business doing things like branding, mentorship, tech, consulting, branding, a wide range of stuff. And recently decided that maybe it's time to go back to corporate to relearn things, to contribute in a different way. And now a new term, corpreneur for myself, and enjoying myself so far. So that's a bit about me, and I hope to use this wide range of experience, both from a corporate side, entrepreneurship side, working across different countries, different regions, different industries, to shed light on this topic on cultural and generational well-being. So hopefully I can share some things that are useful for you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, and over to you, Nicole.
Hi. Sorry. Excuse my voice. I'm still recovering from sore throat, but I hope I get to send my message across. I'm Nicole, so I lead HR for McCann Worldgroup, Singapore and Hong Kong. My background is very much a mix of HR and marketing, which I think makes my company like the best fit for me in that sense. But I'm very happy to be here because I am a huge mental health advocate because of my lived experience. I know you asked for a fun fact, but I think like part of who I am and part of my story is how I battled depression and multiple suicide attempts for over 13 years. And, like coming from that, I think that really shaped who I am as a leader and how I approach HR with kindness and empathy. I advocate so much for inclusive leadership, but even if whether you believe in DEI or not, or use that term, to me, it's always about going back to the basic principles of being human. Like kindness, respect, and empathy for each other, and hopefully, like this conversation will shed more light on what we can do as individuals and as organizations to push forward the advocacy and mental health.
Thanks so much for sharing your story, Nicole. And last but not least, Hiroshi.
Okay, fun fact, I was a pilot with the RSAF. I was also a journalist. I'm a microbiologist. And now I'm in the public service as an organizational psychologist doing positive psychology, specializing in self-compassion. So it's a lot of work. So I actually pivoted from being a journalist in Channel News Asia, and then I went over to the private sector, and I worked there for a few years, and multinational, American. Then moved to the public sector, so the public space. So I've been here for about 12 years now, and it's really amazing to influence 150,000 public officers. So that's quite a huge bulk of Singaporeans who are actually working within the public sector. And also being able to not just influence where I work in A-Star, but also the wider community in whatever that I do, both in the public service as well as outside. So I'm very, very excited and very honored to be one of the advocates for mental health.
Thanks, Hiroshi. I've met you, I think 3 to 4 times, but I still don't know about your storied past, so thanks so much for sharing that. And now, without further ado, I'm Frank. I look after, as mentioned, commercial and growth work, so anything from pre-sales to post-sales out for our clients in the audience. You're hopefully working with one of my teams. So as a panel, we do have questions, but we'd like to throw the first question both to the panelists, but the audience as well, through a bit like what we think of as like a thick cross mechanic. So I think we have those items right here. I'll just ask the handover. So they are two-sided, if I believe. And we'll also invite all the attendees to also scan, this time it's not Mentimeter, it's Poll EV, to also participate on that journey with us, right? So we want to tackle a couple of statements relevant to naturally, how well-being is seen, perceived, and engaged by the workforce today. So I'll raise these statements in turn, and I'll invite the audience to, of course, share your thoughts, and each panelist to also share, sort of tick, of course, if you agree, and red circle if you disagree. Naturally, there are many things that you're like, oh, I think it depends, but we'll just ask you to stick to maybe one lane for now, but happy for you to explain how you think about it. Right, so the first statement, if we can go to the next slide, is Gen Z employees are the most open in our organization in talking about mental health. So 3, 2, 1, raise. All right, and we'll wait for the audience to also give your thoughts. But if I maybe can start with a contrarian first. I think very nicely from Hiroshi. Can you share with us what you see in your workplace?
Slowly, we're seeing the Gen Z absorbing and internalizing. If they need a promotion, they need to follow the tough love, older generation way of doing things. Because they're very pragmatic, this group. And they're also very concerned about their financial well-being. So if the organization, like what Anthea says, is very backwarded in the way they conduct their culture, meaning they're not inclusive, they're not diverse, and they're a little bit like tauke, the old kind of way of doing things. The Gen Zs, when they go into the workforce, they're going to inculcate themselves with this culture, and they're going to sort of make it even more resistant for this organization to do it. So we're beginning to see it in some of our teams with very old mindset. So in A-Star, we're very, very diverse. We have 6,000 over staff, and we have 30 over business units. So some business units are a little bit outdated. It's not perfect, but we're slowly seeing the Gen Zs absorbing that. But on the flip side, we're also seeing Gen Zs also taking on a more progressive role and pushing the agenda. So that's actually very good.
So I guess there's both sides where there's a heavy influence from almost organizational well-being and existing culture, kind of what Anthea covered in her sort of insights earlier. But also they do want to push forward-looking change. And maybe is that on that note that, based on what we see in the crowd, there is a similar mix as well. About 4/5 of you agree, but there's also a fifth of you that may hesitate to do so. I'd like to use this opportunity to switch it up and touch on some of the questions that we have later around generational dynamics, right? So maybe my first question is for Nicole, based on this, and actually holding on the thought Hiroshi just mentioned. I actually just had a dinner with a bunch of new, almost ad agency executives, and coincidentally, two of them were in organizations that use Intellect. And like, oh wow, Frank, you're from Intellect. Love the service, like, oh, you guys are doing such a great job. So I'm like, oh, great, what do you like about it most? Have you used it before? And the answer was, oh, actually, no, we haven't. It's not for me, but I love to ask my team to use it whenever they're facing challenges. And they've never installed or used the app before, right? So nothing wrong with that, right? But I think it's that dynamic where there's a bit of like an agency war, a bit of like, it's for you, not for me. I've went through the sort of hardship of, being shaped by an agency culture, so on and so forth, right? But I'd love to hear what you see in your everyday life.
No, I think that's still a common, scenario that you see here, wherein you have like leaders or even HR professionals who's just like, oh, I need to do this program for you. But I think it's very important that we walk the talk in a sense that we show them that we're using it and that it's helpful. Like it's kind of counter. I guess like in a sense that if you're pushing for a project that you're not attending or you're not doing, why would they feel that it's also important for them, right? So like for me, it has helped when I talk to our employees, I tell them like, I use our employee assistance program to get like counseling sessions for myself, and it has helped me because this, and this. So they kind of see that, oh, it's working for it, and they're using it, so they support it more. So I think we need to do that more often, even if it's not what we think is convenient for leaders.
Thanks for sharing that. And it's true, right? Like, how can you go beyond what is expected, and even if it's not convenient, pushing those uncomfortable truths with leaders. I guess on the converse example, I have the chance to, one day, was at a conference where actually, it was I believe, a managing director at one of the ad agencies who presented, and they organically had a couple of slides on Intellect, which I had no idea about. I never met her before. I've never sort of shared any slides with her, and she just randomly started talking about how her agency utilizes it. So really glad to see that. So, and maybe last but not least, Sam, you work in a hospitality environment where, again, extremely diverse age groups, I imagine, and hospitality typically, and especially in Singapore, has a big influx of young generation, Gen Z workers as well. Do you see them, especially when they engage more on a very shift work basis, do they still engage with well-being, and how would you sort of address that with the population?
I think when we look at all these generational issues, we should not just broadly label them as, okay, Gen Zs, it's like this and like that. I mean, just had a post coincidentally this morning as well. I think more importantly is then, if we look at well-being perspective, let's ask ourselves, if we break it down, fundamentally, what are we solving, right? For me, fundamentally, what we're solving is then, what are the day-to-day stresses? What are things that are weighing on their shoulders, right? I mean, it's a very dynamic conversation that we can discuss for very long, but I think broadly speaking, if you look at it, culturally, in Singapore versus the likes of Vietnam, Indonesia, we're very different. For example, generational-wise, I would like to think of it more like phase of life, right? Just entering the workforce, maybe financial stress, maybe identity crisis, for example, versus someone like myself pushing towards 40 with a kid, different kind of stress and stuff like that. Those with elderly parents who are sick, for example, different stress. So I think it's more important to understand the phase of life, and in that context, what are specific, maybe top 3 drivers in terms of stresses. And from there, I think if you look at it from an intervention HR perspective, it's a lot easier for us to understand what are some things that can impact more employees, rather than having a sweeping statement. Okay, we need a well-being talk. We need an app to make sure that everybody has a voice, but what kind of voice are we looking at? So I think that's a deeper conversation we can probably have as well.
Thanks for sharing that. So really, I think diving down into fundamental groups of motivations and drivers behind individuals, which can obviously go beyond age groups. A caregiver could be a caregiver at 20, but also 40 and also 60. Right? And I guess that's what you're thinking about and going for as well. So without further ado, let's go into our second statement. This statement is, and for those of you who haven't scanned, please do so as well. It's about workplace culture. Does workplace culture have the biggest influence on stigma and well-being, or individual cultural backgrounds? right? Is essentially well-being conversations, is stigma driven by the organization primarily, or by the individual perception and background? So maybe I'll just ask you to think about it, and then 3, 2, 1, individual will be red. Yeah.
I want to see like,
So if you agree with workplace culture having the biggest influence, it's green. Yep. Great. So Nicole, to confirm that's on the individual, right? Yes. Great. And we're also waiting for the audience to share. Most of them are leaning towards organizational culture at the moment. I'd love to see how that plays on your workplaces. Maybe again, we can go to Nicole first to share about your personal take on this statement.
I think a lot of how we approach and see mental health is through our lived experiences also, right? So I do think that while our culture in our organizations would have an impact in the way we handle these conversations, like our day to day and like for most of our life, it's what you've learned, how like say your parents have approached it. Like if you talk about your emotions, for instance, how do the people in your environment see it? Culturally, we have like from different markets in Asia. While we're talking about it more now, there's still stigma. Compared to say like in the UK, where they openly talk about mental health and therapy, and it's incorporated in a lot of like government policies, even insurance policies and all of that. In Asia, like we're still in that process of doing that. So yeah, so I think that there's a bigger impact in the cultural background and how you grew to learn your perspective about mental health.
That makes sense, because essentially your journey through life shapes you, and how people have interacted on this topic before, how you've seen your parents or seniors interact on this topic has shaped how you think about it when you grow up, right? And that naturally engages the individual. So maybe I'd love to also take this culture topic a bit more with Hiroshi as well. Our microbiologist, if you will. And thinking about the A-star context, I am a bit more familiar because I used to be an ex-MTI, working at MTI stat board as well, similar to A-star. But from the outside, we think about it like, scientists wearing lab coats, right? Sort of analyzing very deep research that's shaping the country's scientific future. How do you see culture there play out, and where do you see well-being playing a part in that?
Culture plays a huge part, especially in Singapore, because we're a collective society. Outwardly, we're very Western. We speak English as our administrative language. However, our cultural baggage is actually Chinese, because predominantly it's Chinese. Even the MNCs here, even though they're the Western, the HR people, they're usually locals and they're usually Chinese. So they bring that cultural package over. And often when we talk about these conferences, and I've been to many, they fail to understand that this collective aspect, and it's very Confucianistic. I know there's a lot of Christianity here and I love a lot of religious stuff, but traditionally it comes from that Confucianistic idea where you need to venerate the authority, like the government. Well, you can vote lah, so it's not that bad. And it come to our companies, you have the bosses. So a lot of the culture comes with wanting to go along with the flow, with the senior management, what they say, what they do, and also echo. And somehow we've learned to absorb whatever alignment. So in the public service, we have a rotation. So different leaders have different culture. So what happens is that I do see a few changes happen in the middle management where leadership change. Right. They have different mindset, they have different emphasis, and the culture also changes with that. So to say that the culture is not movable or it's not that true. It's actually hyper-dynamic. You just need to dig a little bit deeper, and then you realize that you can change the culture, but it often is, yes, leadership, but also if you can do your nudging. Because I was just watching a period piece, Korean KTV, I love it, Under the Queen's Umbrella, I loved it, it's like 16 episodes. You have the emperor who wants to do something, he wants to get rid of someone lah. And then the court officials would say, oh, I beseech you, emperor, please don't do it. And then the emperor is like, I'm caught, my hands are tied. My officials do not want to do it, and they give me legitimacy. And if you look at it in the modern context, right, it is the people of the organization that give legitimacy to the leadership, including the public service, because they are also, judged by the leadership style. So it's important to know that in a Confucianistic society, even though you do look at authority, there's also rules in the edict that the people have the right to say and speak up, and the leaders must listen. So that is also tradition. And we often forget that because leaders don't want you to know that.
So speaking of the people, Hiroshi, I'd love to push a bit harder on this topic, if I may. So going off script, like you mentioned earlier, one of the things you're really proud of and happy to be part of is that engagement with the broader public service beyond A-Star, the 150,000 public servants, right? In engaging with the group, we just talked about how the individual experience is so influential in how you approach mental health, but 150,000, naturally you can't be catering to what each individual has been brought up with. How do you, what have you found is most useful in equalizing and engaging with this audience when you talk about your well-being ambassadorship or other areas that you look into?
So we have a very strong peer support network. We have mentors, coaches, as well as peer supporters, well-being ambassadors, thanks to Public Service Division. They really did a fantastic job with that. So in many stat boards and ministries, we have well-being ambassadors. They are voluntary, and they are listening here. So right now, what A-Star is developing is more active. So rather than waiting passively for people to come, we are trying to make it into more an active role where not only do they look out for people who are in need, but they also look at what policies there are that doesn't really quite serve the people, or serving but not so well. So they can actually sort of give feedback on the ground, what is working and what is not, and how can it be refined. I think that is very important. So it's all about communication. So I'm coming back to my point where if the ground speaks up, but speaks up in a respectful way along the proper channels, because there are channels out there, and people think that the channels are just there for like being politically correct, but know how to work, know how the system works, and then use that to your advantage to push the mental health agenda. Don't fight the system. A lot of people say, like, oh, mental health, even Anthea also, she's quite like, yes, we must go, and like that, we must try and tell the CEOs. But always work with the system, because that is the Asian way. We don't fight it. Most people do, but don't do that. Know what the system is, be the master of that process, and use it to your advantage.
So well-being within the system, not trying to almost overcome or change it and shape it. That makes a lot of sense. And we'll used to love that segue to our next statement, which is back to more of a demographic angle and also how people engage with well-being. So this statement is a simple one. Employees over 50 are unlikely to use digital well-being apps. Right, so I'll let you think about that statement for a second, and 3, 2, 1, race. All right, let's wait for the audience. I think this is a bit more contentious, which is fun as well. Let's see how that goes and where that 50-50 is going to play out. So maybe since it's 50-50, we no longer have a contrarian topic anymore. Maybe I'd love to invite Sam to hear your thoughts about this. Park Hotels being a legacy player, owner-led firm. How do you see that? And if they don't engage, how do you engage them?
Maybe I'll share some experiences outside as well, right? I think fundamentally why people stop engaging, if we look at it from that perspective, is then typically they have tried. I don't think anyone comes in an organization thinking that I don't want to engage, I don't want to give my best, I don't want support. I don't think anyone comes in an organization thinking about that, right? But once they tried, once, getting rejected, twice, getting slammed in the face, 3 times, maybe getting slapped in the face or whatever that may be, people stop trying. And they live in the zombified mode where I'm just here to get job done, it becomes very transactional, get paid at the end of the month, and that's about it, right? So I think when we look at all these situations is then we got to ask ourselves from a leadership perspective, even from HR perspective, what's actually happening? Are we creating a safe space? I'll give you an example. Just now we spoke about culture. I think it's a very important topic. And just to build on Hiroshi's point as well, culture is multi-layered and also there's subculture involved, right? So for example, like he mentioned, like in certain cultures, let's say in Singapore, for example, it's very Chinese-based, it's still a lot of respect and stuff, which is where I came from in previous organizations, government-led companies in a sense. And of course, in Asian-led companies, generally it's still like that. But how do we create subculture? And also today, interestingly, right, the dress code was business casual or smart casual. I was struggling a little bit. Let me explain why. Okay, let me explain why. This is my smart casual at work. I was thinking, should I wear my suit and stuff like that? But then I thought I'll come in my usual to bring out important point as well, right? Which is most people in hospitality industry, right? They think of HR or business leaders as full suit, typically black, boring white and stuff, right? Typically. And they come to office, they look stern, you got to follow policies, they're here to scrutinize whether you punch in, punch out, whichever that may be. I intentionally, from day one, tested the system. Thankfully, nothing happened so far. Passed my probation already, by the way. So I intentionally dressed down a little bit, right, in a way to show that, to send a message essentially, right, that yes, this is the culture, but I'm a different HR altogether. I want to be seen as more approachable. I want to be seen as a HR that's unconventional, innovative, and someone that is here to work with you, right? And that has worked out very well for me. And I think the small cues that we send out, right, the signals, actually matters a lot in terms of getting people to be more open, getting them to feel more comfortable. Yes, I think the overall culture is still shaped by the leadership team itself, but it doesn't mean that we cannot create small influences starting from a small subculture and spreading it out further. So that's how I feel if people are not opening up, we need to ask ourselves why and which part of culture is the low-hanging fruit that we can start with to start effective change. And once the rest see, hey, this group is pretty different, it's actually impactful, it's actually interesting, people start talking, and that's where you can start leveraging on that to build further. That's my take, actually.
Thanks so much, Sam. It reminds me of like a leadership saying that someone just shared with me the other day where he said, obviously as leaders, we all take our work extremely seriously, but how can we take ourselves less so? Right? And in a way that showcases to our teams what we believe in, which is obviously outcomes at work, but in a much more collegiate and like as you mentioned, sometimes informal environment where suitable. So we do have another engagement section, so I'd like to move on to our fourth statement first. And that statement is actually a unique one around how well-being programs are communicated, right, today. So this statement is specific to well-being programs. I realized that wasn't said above. So the same well-being program can work for everyone in the organization, but it's about how you angle, communicate, or market it. Right? So I'll leave you to think about it in 3 seconds, and maybe 3, 2, 1, you can raise. Okay, so this time we have a more universal one. So some of these topics are naturally meant to be contentious, on purpose, but I'd love to dive a bit into that dynamic as well, right? So maybe this is more for you, Nicole, whereby, in an ad agency, I am familiar that not only obviously do you have many people like yourselves and your teams working in office, but a lot of companies have people dedicated into your clients' locations. And the challenge is that they can't maybe join your everyday, lunches in office or all that culture building, right? So if that's the case, how do you treat these different groups of employees that are scattered all over, your client sites with the HQ team and sort of create that shared culture?
So like you said, right, like majority of our team in Singapore and Hong Kong, while they work hybrid, we also have and support people who are deployed either in our clients' offices or are mobilized in other countries, but we're managing out of Singapore, like in Australia or in the Philippines. And I think like having that mixed kind of workforce wherein you have people who get to go to the office and interact with the teams in person, while some are 100% remote or are disconnected from the main teams, right? I realize that while it's helpful that they all have access to our employee assistance programs, our online trainings, our online resources, as well as our benefits such as our time well taken or our unlimited leaves policy. While those are helpful, it reaches people in a different way. when they're out of the office, right? So I think what I saw that has worked very well for us, managing people from across markets and across business units, is that number one would be having very regular HR check-ins. So throughout the year, I would make it a point to have at least a 30-minute catch-up session or check-in session with most of our employees, regardless of their work setup. And that's to talk about, it's usually open-ended. Like I would always start those conversations with, how are you doing really? And so like that gives them the platform to talk about their experiences, their challenges, the kind of support that they need. But at the same time, it makes your employees feel that you care and that they are being listened to. Especially when you follow through with that conversation. Like after that 30 minutes, it shouldn't stop there. It shouldn't be a tick box exercise. Oh, I've talked to you already. If they have given, if they talked about their challenges, follow through in that. Like for example, we have employees who are caregivers to their parents or their siblings who may have disabilities, for instance. So as like, in my role as HR, I need to look into how can I support that? What help can we extend to them? If it's not financial, what other support can we extend? Like for example, offering flexibility in their more flexibility in the arrangements that they have, right? So that's one. And then the second is training your managers and coaching your managers to have mindful and consciously inclusive conversations with their teams, because they're the ones who are on ground. I'm only one person. I won't be able to watch everyone. So they need to know how to spot, risk to well-being as well, and how to approach those conversations. Plus that's on top of us having mental health first aiders, thanks to Intellect. But that has helped us in a lot of ways. At the end of the day, I think for you to be able to manage diverse teams, cross borders, you need to open multiple channels of conversation. You need to have safe spaces where they can be honest and where people feel that they can trust you and they won't be judged for the things that they say. Second is you really need to get to know your teams well. You have a question here like, does the same program work for everyone? Every person is different. While we have similarities, the way we approach things may be different. So we have to understand that your teams would have different personalities. The way they accept help also can be different. So you need to know that before executing any program, like even the remote teams. Like some of them are really happy with just not talking to everyone. Like some can be like that, and you have to accept that. And then lastly, your programs need to be holistic. It's not, well-being is not just mental health. You have financial, you have occupational, physical, all these, like you need to take that into account with how you approach well-being. We shouldn't stop at just, training programs, yoga sessions, or stress workshops and all of that. Like maybe connecting them with a bigger purpose could also help. Like for us, like it works that we have volunteer activities, that's different, but it connects them to, again, like a bigger impact or a bigger purpose in their lives. Sorry, that's a long answer, but that's how I see it.
Yeah, so thanks so much, Nicole. So fundamentally, I guess really getting to have channels, whether it's essentially from your self-initiative or through the much wider manager network you have to engage employees, know what really makes them tick, and I guess then fit the right policy or flexibility for their situation. And maybe it's a topic I'd like to touch with Hiroshi in a second as well, where, earlier we were having this conversation like, what is the mandatoriness in well-being, right? Like, I think that's something I've heard a lot with our clients and partners as well. You just alluded to it by, talking about check-ins and so forth on Nicole's side. Like maybe Hiroshi, on your side, because you mentioned the well-being ambassadors and the various forms of, ways that employees can be part of other workplace groups. where do you see that, being like, oh, we should mandate some of it, otherwise there'll be no ambassadors? Or where do you see it like, oh, let's have it as a purely voluntary effort?
Yeah, so the end game is mandatory, but that's for you guys in the next 5 years. But right now, the faster you transit, the less you'll be forced down your throat. Because it is coming, there is no denying it. From an organizational standpoint, the first thing you need to do is to establish a well-being framework for your organization that suits you. For family-run businesses, it's usually about family control and also about loyalty and sincerity. For non-family businesses, more corporate, especially SMEs in Singapore, it also is a similar line, but with the emphasis on values. And then for multinationals, it's really about how they're going to expand. It's all about profit, but how profit can be pegged to well-being. Yeah. So the framework needs to resonate with the company. Then how do we come up with this framework? I mean, there's many frameworks here. We have Impact. I mean, A-Star came up with our own framework. So we have 5 different bubbles. One is positive health, which includes mental health, physical health, including emotional agility. Then we also have relationships, because connections and social bonding, it's ultimately so important in Singapore, more so than elsewhere, especially if you compare it to the West. Normally we sort of compare it to like Western weird countries. But social connection is number 2 in this well-being survey, and they have values among Singaporeans. Because most people, when they get annoyed or they get very pissed off, it's usually because of someone else. And most of the time when they leave the job, it's because of someone else, right? It's not because the job is not great. Probably in the exit interview you say that, but actually deep down inside, I really hate the person, I cannot live with that person. So this shows how much we actually put our love, commitment, and dedication to what we do in our jobs in relation to other people, our colleagues, and our bosses. So connection is fundamental, and we don't have that in many, we just have like social connection and all that, but it's not front and center. Then, of course, we have work-life balance, competency training, as well as assurance. So a sense of security is number 1 among Singaporeans. And this is your psychological safety, your physical, operational health and safety, don't trip down over stuff. And the last one is financial. Singapore, we're going through inflation, it's very expensive. And in order to have families and to support people, we need to be financially secure. Now, companies cannot provide that because you earn a salary. So we will need to train ourselves to be financially literate. So there's also some personal responsibility that we need to take. We cannot just rely on the company to work and allow the company to pay us. We are not under the pension scheme anymore. We cannot let the government says, okay, you need to do this, you need to do that, because we're out of school. We are no more in school, even though schools should do financial literacy, but that's another thing. But we're all adults now. So if the company can provide financial literacy talks, that would be fantastic as well, because it helps them plan for the future.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Hiroshi. And it's key that you brought up that pillar-based approach to well-being, right? Because it's well beyond what mental health is. And actually, Intellect, we like to say, wow, that's sort of our core topic. We have seen how, as you mentioned, things like having struggles with savings or eating poorly, sleeping poorly, not connecting with others at work, fundamentally affect your mental health as a root cause, right? So with that, I may like to turn the conversation again to the audience. We do have a live, I believe, question and poll asking the audience, what's your biggest challenge in engaging specific groups in mental health? So if we can turn to that point, perhaps, or let the audience, share their thoughts. But while we are going ahead to do so, maybe I'll pose a question to Sam as well as we're waiting for that. So around that last topic, and something I hear so much from the audience, the clients today, is that okay, we really want to bring access to employees. We want to make it universal. But there's just one challenge. We are unsure how to deal with the office, non-office dynamic. Companies have people in warehouses, drivers, logistics, in hotels, front of house in restaurants, and the list goes on. Right? How do you see that playing out in park hotels? And have you found anything that is really key to engaging non-office groups as well in such a topic?
I think to be fair, at this moment, we are still quite in the infancy phase in all this. But if I use other examples where I was consulting previously and stuff, I think the key thing, if I can just distill it to one point, is how do you make it as friction-free as possible, right? Very often, companies, we invest a lot in applications, programs, but we realize that utilization rate is very low, right? Like Frank shared example, right? It's a good program. People say that, oh, it's great, amazing, but I didn't download it myself. And the question is why? Because very often we realize that for certain profiles of people, it may be difficult. For example, if we talk about, let's say, why do most people think that those in the 50s, 60s may not use applications so much, it could be a sense of fear that, okay, this is too complicated, I don't want this. It's not that they don't need help, it's too complicated. For people who are, let's say, in my age group, the millennials, maybe, okay, we're too busy, this is fine, I can manage it, I want to show a tough side of myself, for example. That could be a friction as well. So I think the key thing is when we look at different demographics, right? Front office, back office, whether it's warehouse, rank and file, corporate employees, what can we do to help them reduce the friction to access all these resources that we've built? Because the intention is always good, but how do we deliver it? How do we ensure that it's simple enough to access it so that they realize, okay, it's not actually that difficult. It's usually the first step that is very challenging typically, and once they overcome that mental barrier, and even sometimes physical, actual barrier itself, people start accessing it. And once they use it, people realize there's benefit, they'll keep using it. It's like playing games, right? Once you get momentum, you get a win, you want more wins, essentially. So I think the first thing is how do we look at the friction-free or frictionless aspect of things, and then how do we build on the wins from there as well, right? Which is why we talk about things like how do we celebrate small wins? How do we have certain events? And events is not just to feel good, but there's a purpose behind it, for example. How do we celebrate certain messages? How do we amplify it? Recently, on LinkedIn, I was sharing a post about employee engagement, for example, relating to this, right? A lot of HR fall in the mistake where, okay, this is my calendar. I do all these events to engage with my employees. So what if employees feel good for that very moment, that euphoria for a moment? It doesn't serve any purpose. But we have to work backwards, like what Hiroshi mentioned. Let's say from a MNC point of view, we're looking at profitability. How do we lead to that, right? One lever could be well-being. And from a well-being perspective, what are different initiatives we've got to push out, whether it's application, physical events, whichever that may be, and then start measuring the actual success, which will then allow us from a management or the company perspective to delegate even more resources to make things happen. So I think this is, of course, a very dynamic thing, but making friction-free, celebrating wins, and then positioning it as a way where there's direct connection to business outcomes. I think these are things that are very important.
I really like that. So it's really, what is the first barrier? How can we overcome that and almost build that small to big snowball, right? Where you talked about, that first small win can accumulate into a big snowball that achieves, a lot more down the road. And actually totally makes sense because I think in our world, naturally and by necessity, we have to make some assumptions, some stereotypes. But, as Nicole, you touched on, people are so individual. I think actually looking at Intellect statistics, we do see actually a significant portion of our users, whether it's app-based, web-based, or phone call / clinic-based, are actually from the 50, and from what I've seen, up to the 70-plus-year-old segment, which is interesting. And I do see that, honestly, on my personal life, where my main challenge with my father, for example, my dad, is stopping him from buying fishes on TikTok. He just is on TikTok way too often, and there's this fish auction thing, which apparently is big. And he's snowballed that he's got these wins because he has trophies in the house for his fishes. Right, so maybe coming back to this poll here, it's really interesting to see the dynamics where, we talked about generational gaps, blue collar, but we do see that as somewhat, yet not as high a challenge compared to really broader cultural, the one size sort of fails all dynamic, the cultural stigma, and the high performance conservative environment topic. So maybe it's this sort of conversation I'd like to end off today's session. So two things I'd like to ask, of course, all of you to share, your sort of last insights. But before that, I was curious also whether any panelists, I'll leave this open this time, would like to talk less so about now employees, but Now moving on the employer, back to your boss, board, C-suite, and addressing that key point, right, the high performance and conservative environment. Do any of you all have thoughts about how you have approached that in past or current workplaces that you have found to be essential to share with the group here today?
Maybe I can take that one. I think number one is you have to really understand the business that you're in. You have to understand the actual jobs of the people beyond their job titles. And then also understanding, coming from that, what is important for them. Like in getting the buy-in of your senior leaders, like how would they prioritize well-being, right? Then if you understand the business well enough, how is it affecting your numbers? Like say, if you're seeing a lot of employees are either getting sick or taking sabbaticals or leaves all the time, how is that affecting the delivery of the work that you do for your clients as well? So if they see that data, then you get that buy-in. At the same time, I do believe a lot in co-creation. For things to work, for your initiatives to work, it shouldn't just be coming from the management. Like I mentioned earlier, people are different. So if you involve them in the process, in the decision making, then you get to co-create solutions that are relevant for them. You get to co-create solutions that they feel are more impactful for them. Then you get like the engagement that you need. Then hopefully in turn that affects your performance, that affects their productivity and all that. So I think we need to normalize the co-creation. We shouldn't assume all the time that we know what our people need.
That's true. Thanks so much, Nicole. I am conscious of time, so maybe I'd like to invite everyone, starting this time from Hiroshi, and ending with Sam, to share your final parting thought, something you'd like to leave with the audience about what they can do next back in their workplaces to look at intergenerational workplace dynamics and ultimately addressing the cultural relevance and stigma around mental health.
Yeah, so the intervention for to remove the stresses of generation, intergeneration stresses, really comes from needing the other side to understand more. So if the teams have different age groups inside it, that will always be stress within this age group because maybe the values don't really align, but it's essential for integration. It's like our HDB when we have the quota system. We mix people. It is stressful in the beginning, but it is the only way for them to understand what the other person is doing rather than just saying, the younger interns do all the whatever stuff, and then the senior management do whatever stuff. Have them mix around. It is a very difficult sell, especially with senior management who is more traditional, to have younger speakers speak up. Because when they do speak up, they think they're very rude and they're very disrespectful. But that's subjective to the leadership. And the how they criticize the younger generation and how the Gen Zs or maybe some of the millennials take it is also subjective, the way they see that they're not being heard. Yes, it will happen, but it's essential for them to actually hear each other out. But I think it's kind of difficult for HR leaders because they're also a career HR, and they also are very aware that their promotion is also on the line, and they cannot seem as though that they are overly pushing for something that the leadership does not know about or doesn't really seem to want. So I would say, in your heart, if you feel that this is something that you want to champion, mental health, well-being, is to set up a separate unit. So it does not taint the operations of HR. Because HR is basically compliance. If you want innovation, it does not happen in HR. It does not. They need to follow the regulation and very strict by it. So if you want innovation in well-being, set up a separate unit. I saw Andrew just now, well-being ambassador, chief well-being officer for NUS. That is the future. So if you're an HR leader and if you have the power to create more units, create one separate unit that focuses on innovation, well-being, and getting peer supporters to come in. So it's more of an active role. And then leave the day-to-day total rewards, HR, promotion, succession, all to HR's mandate. Because you have a split. Because when I speak to HR people, there are two. One is they love the job because they love interacting with people. Have them go to the well-being. Then those that just want to follow everything by the book, then you leave them to do the HR. Because ultimately, you need your salary paid at a certain date. And these people does it the best. So you leave them to do that. Yeah.
Thanks, Hiroshi. Controversial words, but we did ask to be challenged today. So, and maybe over to you, Nicole, and then Sam.
I'd like to think that HR can also be innovative. It really like depends on like how you approach things, right? Like, but I in some ways I do agree that if it shouldn't be just an HR responsibility. I think what we should be championing is for it to be a shared responsibility. Like you have, if HR can't do the job or if HR can take the lead, at least find champions who will push for the agenda. If you can't change it in like an organizational level, do the subgroups. Like in their mini teams, in your departments, there would already be, people who can help you champion. If they can change, the mindset of like 5 people, and then, think that they can replicate that across the board, then that can help. I think like at the end of the day, awareness and understanding is key through it all for us to push forward with the agenda. Again, going back, I know I've been like repeating this a lot, but as basic as it sounds, that we need to understand people, whether you admit it or not, a lot of us don't do it as often as we should. So I think that's it for me.
Thanks, Nicole.
Okay, I'll do a quick one. I'm mindful of time. I won't challenge Hiroshi's statement. I'll probably challenge the HR leaders in the room.
It's
then.
not a challenge. It's literally a conflict of interest, if you think about it. If someone comes up to you and then they're like, I have mental health issues, the HR person would say that, oh my God, how do I get rid of this person? Right?
Please don't be that kind of HR.
I can tell you, in the HR, it's like that. I mean, this is realistic, right? So if you have a well-being unit that looks after the well-being of people, they will champion this particular employee. So you're a bit like a union, you champion this employee saying that it's very important for this. It is really a conflict of interest if you think about it.
Anyway, I'd like to challenge the HR leaders in the room, right? For us to really have a voice to champion the well-being things that matters to us, and to be truly innovative, to push the agenda, to be seen beyond the stereotypes of HR even, I guess. First and foremost, we got to be commercially minded. I think that's something that I've seen a lot in these days, where the fact that I'm bringing actual business to the table, bringing partnerships, even building platforms, technology, that gave me a very strong voice in a very short time in my organization, and even through the consulting work that I've done previously. I think if you're always being boxed in a situation where you're just, okay, this is what I can do or what I have to do, and think of HR as a role and not a lens, I think that's where the difference happens. If we see it as a role, we can only do this, anything else, not my responsibility, right? If we have a lens to say, this is my HR lens, but I'm a value creator and problem solver in an organization, I can do a lot of things, but I come from this perspective. And once HR is able to come from a commercial perspective, you're able to really move the needle and not just have a feel-good engagement factor, for example. You have more say in what are the levers that makes a difference commercially, which well-being is definitely one important thing. So that's my parting challenge, perhaps, to all the HR leaders and professionals over here. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you all for the panelists. So I think just a closing phrase from me and lifting, what the panelists have said. I think we've heard how the co-creation of a holistic organizational approach to well-being, not a copy-pasted solution, is what's key for us in approaching such a topic. Finally, looking forward, this wouldn't be a well-being conference without an AI panel, so I believe that's what's up next. But before that, please put your hands together to thank our panelists, Hiroshi, Nicole, and Sam.